because people think, is it okay? Yes, absolutely. Get your phones out and use them, because that's the way it works nowadays. The QR code is my Facebook page, but we'll move on. So what I wanted to talk about today was in the context of what you are doing in your program, as is something that Jennifer and I talk about a lot. How long have I been doing for? About 3 years now?
5 years.
5 years,
yeah.
From the very beginning. And that's the ongoing challenge between connecting what you do in an academic environment, even in an academic business environment, what actually happens out there in the real world, because there's not much continuity there. There's in fact very little continuity there. And you'll see that particularly as you move out into co-ops and start to look for those first steps of your career process, or trying to connect even with what the next career step might be, or even what your career is, because what even defines a career nowadays is completely different than what defined it as little as 15 years ago, never mind an entire generation ago. The word career, by the way, does anybody know where it comes from? No, it's a Latin word meaning to bounce around. Careen and career are related as words, as far as the etymology of the words go. So your career is your journey, your river run through life, and it's not any one thing that you do, it's actually a journey. So I'm not going to get all zen on you, but we'll start with that. So what we're going to talk about today is personal branding in the age of Pinterest. And the title is deliberately provocative. I only actually mentioned Pinterest once, I think, for the whole thing, but it gets people's attention because it's the fastest growing social network out there right now, somewhat tripling the adoption rate of Twitter. So there's a lot of interest there. And there's a very specific reason for it. We are wired as human beings to be very visual animals. We have a pair of front-facing eyeballs. And visual cues mean an enormous amount to us emotionally. And the old saying about a picture being worth 1,000 words is literally true in terms of the amount of information that we gather. Both, and when you particularly think about image, both in terms of frozen image like film or photography, but also the ongoing micro snapshots that our brain takes, billions of times a second. We're incredibly wired to read signals. There's great studies out there that show, for instance, that a human being is able to tell within a few inches where someone's eyes are focused who's 10 or 20 meters away from them. Whether they're focused here, 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 even if that person is meters away, we have an incredible ability from infancy, these studies go back to infancy, to be able to read the human face. So we look at stuff and read a lot from it. So the fact that Pinterest is growing the way it is, and it's a primarily and social visual medium, unlike all the other media which have a mixture of text and images, Pinterest is purely image. And we'll touch on that part largely. So the one thing I want to get sort of out of the room right away, for those of you academically inclined, if you do reading any of the literature on branding and personal branding from a business or from a social context, there's a lot of argument about it. In fact, even the concept of personal branding has fallen out of favor sort of in the last 2 or 3 years. It's no longer the most current, fun, sexy meme that's out there. There's other ones that have replaced it. I still think it's somewhat useful, though, particularly in a business context, because it creates for us what are called heuristics. And heuristics are intellectual shortcuts to get quickly to an early solution to a problem. The danger of some is being the wrong solution, but it gets you there quickly and can save you a lot of time when it's done correctly. And the language of branding acts like a heuristic when I'm trying to talk about how we show up in our careers as consumers, as businesses, and so on, because it's a pre-existing language. It's a nice box to kind of pull out all the pieces and see what kinds of metaphors and analogs apply to things that we kind of might otherwise struggle to find a language for. I still basically think that the concept of branding and personal branding is useful. So that's what really those first 3 bullets talk about. And the last one we'll touch on a little bit through the whole thing. It says that as consumers, we've constructed identities that interact with the constructed identities of businesses. And that is more true now than it ever was. To some extent, we've always had these sort of what Seth Godin calls, tribal inclinations. We like to group together into certain kinds of behaviors, cultures, values, taste, style, all that kind of thing. But through the social era, through Facebook, through Twitter, through Pinterest, that's just becoming stronger and stronger, because unlike before, our ability prior to the social era was very limited in terms of what we could do to broadcast our sort of tribal social selves. You could do it at the dinner table, you could do it at a party over a beer, but you were very constrained geographically and temporally. You couldn't kind of push it outside of wherever you could be, right? Other than maybe writing articles for magazines and newspapers, right, in traditional media and so on, or radio or television. It was very difficult to kind of extend past the boundaries of this moment in this room as far as promoting who you are and your particular tribal affiliations. The social world has changed that completely. One of the fundamental structures that I think isn't talked about often enough when we talk about the social world, particularly in business, is that the model of communication has changed. We are able to speak, everyone is able to speak to everyone else at the same time. And prior to the rise of Facebook and all the other social platforms that have come up since then, that was an impossibility. You would get noise. Communication theory would have taught you that everyone sending out every signal and attempting to receive every signal simultaneously was an impossibility. You go into the black box of communication theory and you come up with noise at the other end, white noise, because there's too much signal to process. In the social world, that's no longer a problem. Using particular tools like Hootsuite or Sociable or various other kinds of platforms allow us to organize visually into these little columns. There's a cool little app that's available on a number of different platforms called Flipbook that allows you to kind of flip up through dozens of different online media and different platforms simultaneously and to communicate with them in very near real time. Those kinds of opportunities to identify our brand, identify our tribe, and then connect with all the others to whom we are related globally. It doesn't have, you're not geographically constrained anymore. It can be someone who feels and thinks and has the same style attributes and feelings that you do, but they happen to live in Australia or Hong Kong or Frankfurt. It doesn't matter, right? It's irrelevant. The location's irrelevant. Time zones are irrelevant in this world because it's asynchronous communication. You don't have to be picking up the phone and waking someone up in a different time zone because they're in bed while you're up. It doesn't matter anymore. When they get up, whatever it is that you said, whatever fashion you promoted yourself in, they wake up to that, right? It's right there in front of them. So that's the larger context. I'm going to give you why I think this is important. And you can start, I don't think I need to connect the dots for you, how as you're beginning to build the beginnings of your journey through life, the beginnings of your career, that this kind of concept that I don't think is going away. This is not a blip. This is not, a fad. The platforms will change. The way we use them, God knows Facebook changes every 48 hours in terms of its actual user interface and so on. But the fundamental social structure that's evolved in the last sort of decade and a bit, that's not going anywhere. We've got that now as permanently as we have printing since Gutenberg. Like this is now the way it's going to be from now on. If you don't go back out of this, this is a rabbit hole you don't climb out of backwards. This is the world we will now permanently inhabit. My favorite quote around branding is from the founder of Amazon.com, a guy named Jeff Bezos. And Jeff said, isn't it nice how I can be on the first name person basis with someone like that? And I'm not. I'm never met the guy in my life. But I'll call him Jeff, which accrues to my brand. Your brand is what people say about you when you are not in the room. And I love that quote because when you deconstruct it, the layers in it are so much fun to play with. There's two fundamental messages buried in that right off the hop. Number one, it's what people say about you. So unlike anyone outside of business, I call them civilians, civilians believe that the golden arches are McDonald's brand. No, that's a sign, that's a logo, that's an image, that's a graphic, that signifies certain things, but that is not their brand. Anyone inside the business world understands that your brand is not defined by the business. A corporation's or business's brand is not defined by them, it is defined by their customers. Your customers define your brand. You can attempt to influence it, but you cannot control it, not completely. Think back only a year, on certain cruise lines who flipped cruise ships upside down in the Mediterranean, or certain food producers in Canada who ended up producing tainted beef, and their efforts to control their brand clearly failed. You cannot control all the factors. You can try really hard to spin, to manipulate, to PR your way in and out of beliefs on the parts of your consumers and customers, but you cannot fully control it. Life happens. The people you're in relationships with form opinions about how you react to those moments in life, and in that moment you have a brand. Every one of us, and again, this is where I go back to the beginning, there's other ways to describe this process. If you're a sociologist, an anthropologist, you have other language in this, but for us in business, branding works because it's language I'm comfortable with. It fits me like a jacket. You know, I like it, I like branding. So I like to use the language of branding to describe even us, not just businesses. So the first thing that Jeff says is we don't define our brand, those around us do. And I'll unpack that a little bit later because that has some interesting implications. If you are not your brand, if you can't control your brand right in this moment, what does that mean? The second thing he says is that your brand is A, not defined by you, it's defined by others. And B, you're not there when it's happening. Right? You're not present when he says, your brand is what people say about you when you are not in the room. Why? Can't remember the guy's name. The scientist who said that when you observe a phenomenon, it changes the behavior of the phenomenon. It's Heisenberg principle, yes. Heisenberg said, basically, this is the Heisenberg principle played out in branding. When the corporation is in the room attempting to spin or adjust or through their various gigantic dollar-fueled and leveraged gravitational efforts to shift what's going on as far as how customers feel about them, that's not really how customers feel about them. Particularly as Canadians. When your waiter walks up to you in a restaurant and says, so how was the meal? As Canadians, we usually say it's great. Even though we have just said, when the waiter was not in the room, we've just turned to our friend and said, this steak seriously sucks. This is the worst steak I've had in 3 years. Waiter comes along, oh, it's great, we're fine, we're good. Because we're Canadian, we just do that. We're good that way. But when the waiter walks in, right, it shifts the brand. However, will you go back to that restaurant? So which version of the brand was the accurate one? The one when the employee of the business was in the room, or the one of the employee of the business was not in the room? That's a question. You can have an answer. Which is the real brand? Absolutely. The one when the business was not in the room. Because we have, I forget was the phrase for it, it's in Outliers when they're talking about KL. A form of speech where we adjust and deviate and say nice things when really the truth needs to be spoken. It's a particular form of speech. And we do that all the time. We adjust our communication with each other and with business brands when we are confronted directly with our friends and the brands and so on. We don't tell the truth. So keep those two things in mind as we move forward. The one thing I want to add to that is the time piece. Right? So the first thing this talks about is that it's other people define your brand. The second thing is it happens when you're not here. Just extend that one step further to say that it happens when you are not here in time either. That is right now. And this is true whether it's about you as a professional or a brand, like a corporate brand. In the particular moment right now, there is nothing you can do. You have absolutely zero ability to impact your brand right now. Your brand and a corporate brand is always the consequence of prior actions. So whatever people think of you right now, there's virtually nothing you can do right now about it. Because what they think about you right now is the collected history of all the things you've done and said until this point. But at each moment, we're powerless in the face of that particular statement. There's nothing we can do. And we've all experienced that when we have wished we could have unsaid something or done something. When we're in front of someone, we go, oh, now they know that about me and I wish I hadn't done that because now they're thinking, but that's history, that's water under the bridge, and what that person's thinking about you right now, there's not much you can do about it anymore. You can attempt to dissuade them to hold that opinion, good luck. There's tons and tons of research. If you want to read the greatest book on this ever written, Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Little tough reads, a little dense, a little academic, but it will tell you everything you ever need to know about how human beings make decisions. He's a Nobel laureate in economics, although he is a psychologist. His Nobel Prize was on decision making, how human beings make decisions, and his work is amazing. And one of the things you learn in there is that generally, in the moment, human beings don't change their mind a whole lot. We just don't. It takes a long time. Right? There's some exceptions as far as emotions and stuff go. You can break down and cry on your knees, and that might change a person's perception of your brand. But beyond that, arguing with them, convincing them, no, not going to have much impact. Okay, so with that framework, the first thing that we look at in terms of building a personal brand is you need to know who you are. And again, that's true whether you are a business or a person. From a business, I don't know whether you've done this yet in terms of policies, procedures, building corporate and cultural frameworks. What's the one classic little document or expression of internally what a company wants to be?
Mission statement.
Mission statement. Okay, so you should find the heart of what a company wants to be, how they would like to be talked about when they're not in the room, in their mission statement. And we personally all need mission statements. We have to have some clarity about who we are and who we want to become, because we're always becoming something, not just who we are, right? It's who do we want to become, and if we take that thing I said where there's an odd relationship in time between what our brand is right now and how we behaved in the past, you flip that upside down and you understand that in order to have a certain brand a year from now, you need to adjust your behaviors right now. Because your brand a year from now will be the collection of all the things you've said and done between now and then. So first of all, you need to decide who you are and who you want to be. Second of all, anybody know who that guy is? Oh, come on. Seriously? It's the hookah smoking caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland. Oh my God. Great movie. Both the old Disney version and the relatively newer one. A lot of fun. Anyways, his line in the movie, he's only got one line. Who are you? That's all he asks Alice. Drives her insane, but he keeps asking that question. Who are you? So that's why he's up there. The hookah smoking caterpillar. So I've got a list there of things for you to consider. If you're wondering, like, where do I start in I, by the way, encourage journaling, I encourage writing, I encourage all that patchouli oil and Birkenstock stuff like vision boards and all those kinds of things. I actually do think they work, although I'm not a big fan of The Secret and all that other ooey stuff. I'm a hardcore cause and effect guy. I don't believe there's secret forces at play in the universe. But I do believe that if you have clarity about where you want to go in your own brain, it does increase the likelihood you will get there. Really, although it's a sloppy analogy, it really is the same as deciding that you're going to drive to a certain place rather than simply getting in your car and driving randomly. Right? Might you get to a good place? Maybe. In one article I wrote a few months ago, I said, is there a probability that if you begin walking from any point in North America, that at some point you will encounter the Grand Canyon, if you walk in a straight line? Probabilistically, yes, there is. There's a random chance you might hit a really cool place called the Grand Canyon. Is it likely? No, not really. The probability is tiny, given you go off by 1 degree at the beginning of that journey, you'll be out by thousands of miles by the end of it. You need to know where you're going. You need to pick a destination. And that doesn't necessarily mean, although it could include an amount of money, or a specific position, or a certain corporation, or whatever, a certain activity. But it's by no means limited to that. So there's a bit of a list for you to look at. What are your values, your passions, your talents, desires, idiosyncrasies, and habits? By the way, the idiosyncrasies one is an interesting one. I'm going to throw a lot of these out at you. I read blogs and books and stuff voraciously, and interesting people intrigue me. There's a fellow named David Rendall, has a website and a blog called The Freak Factor. And he's got a book called The Freak Factor. He's also got a new book called The Freak Factor for Kids, How to Raise Freaky Kids. David Rendall's argument is that when we look at our most vanilla selves, we are unlikely to find our brand. And I really struggled with kind of like what that actually meant. So 2 things to think about. One of the questions he asked, which behavior in pre-adolescence did your teachers and parents most want to beat out of you? Because there's probably a secret there. Were you a doodler, a talker, a fidgeter, a runner, disappearer, a book reader? Like the things that people said, you're kind of odd when you keep doing that. Would you please stop? Would you stop doodling while I'm talking to you? Would you stop tapping your foot? Like all those little things. David suggests, and I can't call him David because this guy I actually do know. He suggests that you look at those behaviors, you go cast back in your mind, those weird, freaky things that people have tried to kind of polish the rough edges off you, there's probably a very interesting secret in those rough edges. How I extended that into branding and careers is this. Say you're trying to position yourself as an accountant, okay? And you want to do something significant. To use Steve Jobs' world, you want to do more than just accounting. You want to knock a dent in the universe. That's one of the things that Mr. Jobs said. Our job is as human beings, to the extent that we can, is to knock a dent in the universe. Let's have some fun with this. So you don't want to be a regular accountant. If you haven't read David's stuff, Rendell's stuff, the freak factor stuff, and you don't know about the freakiness of life, you would be inclined to push forward on all the great accounting skills. I can add numbers, I can read balance sheets, I can do forensics, I can do audits, I can do all the languagey, numbery things of accounting and bookkeeping and so on. One trouble with that. What is that? Yes? Every other accountant will make exactly the same claims. Whether they're true or not is another thing. You might be better at audits or better at, reconciling cash flow statements or something. But on the face of it, that's what we're all saying. So you just entered the world of, in Seth Godin's language, of black and white Jersey cows. There's no purple cow here. There's no big moo. Right? This is just, okay, I can't tell that you might make really good milk, but you look exactly like that cow over there, so I have no idea, right? You're both black and white. You're just uniform. He suggests that maybe you need to look at your freaky behavior. Maybe the things that make you weird. Maybe the things that make you slightly different. Is there a secret in there? Because you need something. If you're going to be remarkable, if you're going to knock a dent, at least in your own universe, never mind the larger universe out there, at least knock it out of the park for yourself. Going with the standard sets of requirements, the stuff that people look on job descriptions, it will not get you there. Right now, I'm telling you, it will not get you there. Resumes, degrees, straight A's will not get you any of those places. And I know I'm in an academic institution. I'm not supposed to say this. It's the truth. When I did my MBA, my team was very team-oriented. We had a dozen little mottos. I'm big on mottos. One was, there's a B in MBA, which means don't knock yourself out for an A every single time, because sooner or later you're going to A, kill yourself, or you're going to drop an important ball, right? You need to know where to flow your energies and your focus and so on. And if that means sometimes taking a B for the larger cause, don't stress it. Don't wipe yourself out to get an A every single time, because something's going to go wrong when you try for that. So, figure out what's slightly odd about you. See if there's something about you that is unusual. Do look at your idiosyncrasies, not just your sort of normal vanilla strengths that everyone else thinks you should be out there promoting. Particularly when you're networking. This is something that Jennifer and I have talked about a lot, is this huge emphasis on resumes and marks and getting all the formal paperwork, the interviews, when really in this world, it's entirely built on relationships. Networking. If you come crying back to Jennifer after 18 months and say, I haven't got a job yet, done 38 interviews and sent out 597, she'll go, and how's your network working out? And you'll go, a network? What's my network? Yeah, don't do that. Right now, have a great conversation with Jennifer 18 months from now when you go, I've been working my network. I know who they are, I know where they are, I've been on LinkedIn, out for beers, really working with people, trying to figure out who's in the industry, looking at that whole, the way things thread, the way relationships work, and working them. I've got one child, my son, he's 21, he's in the film industry, his entire life, I don't know why, I wish he picked video games because it gave me fewer heart attacks. The industries are very different. The video game industry, you get hired by a company, and you're with a company for life-ish, right? You just produce whatever it is you produce. He's an artist, so he does the drawings and the modeling and the 3D stuff, language I don't completely understand. The film industry doesn't work that way. It's project by project. The film goes, he's a part of the pipeline. When the film wraps, he's out of a job. He has to go find another film to do that over and over and over again. You never have a job per se. You're project-oriented. His entire life is his networks. Every other person up and down that pipeline, the people above him, the concept artists, or the people below him, the compositors and the lighting artists that he knows, who are also looking for the next film. And when they like each other, when the new door opens, they all link arms and they all walk through the door together. That's how this works, right? And my daughter, who is a nutritionist, very much the same thing. Has a private practice in False Creek in Vancouver. She's 27, same deal. She's built the entire practice on, I don't actually think she's got an advertising budget. She has $0 advertising, the practice is full. It's built entirely on a decade of networking. Friends, 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 and friends of friends. That's what it's all about. So that's why, another context here, why the personal branding piece is so important, and why the idiosyncrasies are so important, because If you disappear because you're perfect, that does your network no good at all. If you're not slightly freaky, not slightly weird, and you're not okay with that slight freaky weirdness, you're going to slide beneath the waves, and no one gives a crap about you. Right? Except for your very best friends, and we'll talk about who those are in just a second. But as far as the business world and moving through this journey, you need to give something, for a reason for people to hate you and a reason for people to love you. Not to like you. Those are two different things, okay? The last one there is, and it kind of related, I'm not going to dwell on this a whole lot, is who are you not? It's connected with all this. Just as strongly as you need to know who you are, you need to be just as clear as who you are. I want to read the best book I've ever written on success, period, and there's a million of them, and they all suck. Good to great. The ways that book is wrong, I can't even begin. Marcus Buckingham, the one thing you need to know about leadership, management, and personal success. And he has a bit of fun with it. Marcus Buckingham was a pollster for the Gallup organization, still is, but diverted a couple of years ago after he wrote, many years ago, after he wrote a book called First Break All the Rules, which is the best book ever written on why companies stay with and leave organizations, based on tens of, like a huge, vast, giant data pool generated that he had access to as an employee of the Gallup organization all over the world. Really great stuff. Anyways, his book, he says the one thing you need to know about personal success is, here's a spoiler, discover what you hate doing and stop doing it. Which is the inverse of what we tend to go. We tend to go, discover your strength and hammer away at it. And he's not arguing with that because then he went on to write a whole bunch of books on strengths. But what he was pointing out, when you have to read the chapter, well, the section of the book. The book's divided into dozens of chapters with 3 big sections. The section on personal success, that's the thing he talks about, is discover what you hate doing and stop doing it. Because it's keeping you from doing the things you need to be doing. We tend to feel an obligation to be vanilla, to pay our dues. He said there's no research, sociologically or psychologically, for paying your dues. No one pays their dues. No successful people pay their dues. But what it means is, I need to sweep streets for a while before I become the, head janitor, and then become the head mail person, and then become the head administrator. No, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't generally work that way. There's no paying your dues, not on that level. You got to put in the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell points out. But that's different than the concept of paying your dues. He also says there is no psychological evidence for what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In fact, all the evidence in psychology shows, and to some extent in human biology, that what doesn't kill you generally makes you weaker. What grinds you down does not make you stronger, it grinds you down, is exactly what it does. Unless you're one of those rare human beings who has already born with or moves through life with a very high degree of resilience, and there's some great resilience work that I've written about by a nurse out of Australia, and one of the phrases that she uses in her research is, real resilience is not about bouncing back, it's about bouncing higher. So it's not just coming back to where you were before. If you're truly resilient, you are who you are, you've had the experience, the challenging experience, you've incorporated into who you are now and bounced back actually higher than you were before you had the negative experience. But the truth is, most human beings don't do that. We break, we crack, we fracture under difficult circumstances. So, anyways, I'm on a little tangent there, but I just want to add that into who you're not. Figure out what you hate doing. Stop the idea of putting in your dues, I got to just really do this ugly, grindy work and get beaten up and abused and misunderstood and all that stuff, because later on I'll become famous. Nope, it doesn't work that way. He points out that one of the first things people say is, well, that's fine for really famous people to say. They're already really famous. They've already kind of, they don't have to do all the grunt work anymore. He does a little sort of study, an informal one, of people like Bill Gates and a half a dozen other people, and shows you in the book, none of them have ever done what they hated. From high school on, they were freaks. They just did exactly what they wanted and didn't give a crap about anything else. They were not vanilla. They picked their brand and they stuck to it. And they never did any kind of dues paying. They had the courage or the stupidity, whatever it is, the line to somebody standing between the two, just to do exactly what they wanted. Even though their parents and teachers and friends told them they were insane. They did it anyways. So, Next one is who will you be? Because as we've said before, as I said in the introduction, if your brand is the consequence of your past actions, who you are right now as perceived by others is the consequence of your past, then now is the time to decide who you will be, because you need to start moving towards that. Because when you get to tomorrow, it's too late. Tomorrow is too late to shape your brand tomorrow. Tomorrow's brand. Tomorrow's brand is shaped today. So you always need to be thinking forward. That's, in business, there's a few things that I do believe in traditional business, even though I'm a bit of an iconoclast in most areas, I do believe in the value of visioning and planning. I'm not a big fan of formal business plans. I think there's another conversation. But having a sense of where you're going and having that sort of clarity of vision is really important. So, understand who you will be. Understand that all success is a consequence. Success is like happiness. If you try to get it on its own, it will elude you. There is no such thing, because there really isn't any such thing. Happiness is a myth. There's no such thing as happiness. It's a fleeting moment. There's joy, that's something else. There's flow, that's something else again. But happiness, as we understand it, I don't even know. I'm not even sure what that is. And same with success. Like, what exactly is that? We can each define it for ourselves for a moment. Because not only are we going to define it differently than someone else, tomorrow I'm going to define it differently than I defined it today myself. So there's a constant flow and movement around that. But what it is, absolutely, is a consequence of doing a bunch of other things right. Success is a consequence. It's not a thing you do in and of itself. It's the consequence of having the courage to be freaky. Having the courage to not do what you hate doing, even though other people are telling you you need to pay your dues. It's the consequence of doing a whole bunch of very, very small things right every single day. A very great business writer once said, Jim Rohn, one of my favorite business quotes is, failure is never the consequence of one giant disaster. Failure is the consequence of small errors repeated every day. So we tend to think about, oh my God, that boat just flipped over, it's a giant disaster, nothing bad ever happened to that company before. No. That boat flipping over in the Mediterranean was the consequence of dozens or hundreds or thousands of bad decisions, of little stupid, little tiny, seemingly disconnected mistakes all the way along the journey. So when I talk to people about business success, I tell them one of the things, I told you I'm big into mottos, one of the big things for me personally of business success is one giant vision, a huge giant dent creating